Hi guys. So this is our live today with Matt and Margot, and we're going to be talking about relapse. So we know that January is a really hard month, and on top of that, we have COVID and all this other turmoil in the US, and it can feel really overwhelming, especially when you're often alone with your thoughts, which is like pretty much worst case scenario when you have OCD. So yeah, like me and Matt, we both kind of had a rough couple of weeks, and we're just talking to you about, how to get through it, and the steps you can take, like with OCD therapy in mind for our specific brain, to get through these difficult months. So first of all, we'll talk about like why does relapse happen. Usually there's a few steps that happen before we get to that point where we feel like totally trapped in. How to cope to get out with it. So this is something I learned from Reed Wilson, and he's an excellent therapist at the IUCDF conference, and he gives you some steps on how to deal with a relapse when it happens, and they're actually really simple, which is great because when you're in a relapse you feel like you're about to die. And then how to use self-compassion and to change your beliefs about relapse so that the next time you feel it coming on, you can better handle it before it gets out of control. And I also want to discuss why relapse can be a really good thing. So I actually know that relapse feels terrible in the moment, but sometimes it can be a really good thing in the long run if you handle it properly. So I'm just waiting for Matt to join. I'm not sure. He said he's charging his headphones. Well, maybe while I'm waiting for him, I can just talk a bit about like my sort of relapse in January. So I bought a condo and I was feeling really stressed out about that. And whenever I'm stressed, I start to like just obsess because it's my mind's way of trying to get control. So I started to obsess about all the things I had to do to fix everything, to make everything okay, to make everything perfect. And then one night I just like was staring at a wall and I couldn't move. And I called my mom and I was like, I can't move. I don't know what's going on. And she said like, okay, well, the problem is your beliefs around perfection, which is everybody with OCD has, is like, I was just trying to make everything perfect in that moment, which as we all know, that never ever works because we end up just not being able to attain that goal of perfection, and we start to beat ourselves up, which was another thing I was doing. I was beating myself up thinking, okay, like what could I have done to prevent this from happening, from all these issues happening with my condo? Like what are all the other issues that I could have prevented, and all of these things. And then I started to obsess about things at work and my mind just sort of spiraled. So basically I got out of that by just stopping. And sometimes I think we forget that we're allowed to stop. Like we think that we have to, fix everything right away, and that can be a really like powerful emotion. But I think sometimes it's good to just stop, sit there, relax, let yourself watch TV, let yourself decompress, and then naturally your cortisol levels start to go down, right? And naturally the anxiety slows, and as it slows, you begin to see the situation rationally. And then I started to see, okay, no, I don't need to fix everything right in this moment. There's a lot of time to get everything done. And as that happened, the intrusive thoughts started to feel a little less intrusive. So they still come, but they don't feel as invasive. Okay. Matt's coming in 2 minutes. His headphones he's having some technical difficulties. So yeah, like that's my number one strategy, because when you're in the middle of an anxiety or a panic attack, to me it's impossible to remember what my therapist has said, because when you're in the middle of it, it feels like you're you're in fight, flight, or freeze. So you feel like somebody is physically like attacking you, or like the roof is going to cave in. So another technique I use is grounding. So that's where you think of, like, if you've ever heard the expression, 5 things you can see, 4 things you can touch, 3 things you can smell. And this is a grounding technique. It's also commonly used in mindfulness and meditation. And what it does is it gets your senses back into the real world. So it gets your mind can only focus on so many things at once. And so when you start to focus on things that are right in front of you, you start to focus less on your intrusive thoughts and more on the big picture, on, okay, I can see this plant, it's green. You know, it sounds really silly, but you cannot implement therapy techniques while you are having an anxiety attack, right? You need to like give your brain a chance to have a cool down period. So I see Matt has joined. Good to see. I actually not sure. Here we go. I'll send a request. Works. I don't know if oh, it worked.
Hey, yeah, but my headphones are not cooperating. But how
That's
does
okay.
how does that sound? Like without
I
them?
hear a bit of an echo, but
Okay. Well, why don't we start without them, and then I'll try them in a few minutes again. Like I think they weren't charged enough, but for some reason
okay.
they won't connect to the Bluetooth. But
You don't have just a small pair of headphones? That could work too.
no, I don't. Sorry. But,
That's okay.
all right. So why don't we start, and then in a few minutes I'll just try and connect them again.
Okay. Well, I started by talking about my relapse in January. Did you want to, if you feel comfortable, you could share sort of what you've been going through
Yeah.
and
Yeah, so I've been having a relapse even this morning. So it's good timing actually. And I'm actually going through an exposure right now, and I can actually talk about it because I have this little dry skin thing on my finger. Anyway, it doesn't really matter. Like, I don't know if people can see it, but it's very small. But it's this, because we're washing our hands all the time, right? Like we get irritated hands. Like we're told to wash our hands, and then they get
I
irritated.
moisturize every day now.
Yeah, and so one of my problems is that like I have like an aversion to a fear of moisturizers, right? Because I feel like the chemicals in them, right? So I don't like to use the moisturizer, but I have to use the moisturizer, otherwise I get little cuts on my hands. But then I also I'm triggered by like blood and stuff, so I'm caught between one or the or the other. Um, and this morning I was kind of dealing with, oh, do I put a band-aid on it? No, I should let it dry out and then put moisturizer on it. And then, and I just couldn't make a decision. And anyway, did all sorts of things. And now I've just decided like it's a tiny little bit kind of, like a wet little kind of cut kind of thing. And I'm just leaving it. And I figure if it's not really bleeding, so I figure like, okay, if my skin cells get on stuff that I'm like my headphones and my phone and everything, that's my exposure for today. And I'm a bit anxious, and I'm just gonna have this conversation with you and keep going. So, because that's what I tell everyone else to do. so, so yeah,
Exactly.
yeah. So that's been my. I've kind of, I don't know, the last 2-3 weeks. I think it's interesting because I know we were maybe going to talk about how themes can change too, like with, and I feel like a couple other things, I don't worry about as much. And so now this one with my hands and the cuts and things is now kind of coming back. It's something that I used to have a lot before. And because like the other things that I was worrying about have gone away, now it's like, okay, OCD needs something to fixate on. So it's decided to pick on this. So,
Yeah, we were talking about this in group. You weren't there last week, but we were saying how, like, somebody was saying, I wish this other thing would come back.
yeah,
Uh, and Mike comes on and he says, that's why it's not there right now, is because you don't care about it. So,
exactly. Exactly. That's, yeah, it's so true. And it's so like part of, if you think that way, it's in a way you're just making things worse. It's just kind of almost like almost like a compulsion, like because you're wanting to feel like less anxious, right? you're wanting whatever you want. Oh, I want that thing back because it's not as bad as this one. Or so in the end, you're doing the same thing. You're just trying to get certainty. You're trying to get safety. You're trying to feel better. And when you try to do that, it just makes it worse. And it's so hard to do nothing about it. But that's what you have to try and do, is just accept it and live with it, and it passes on its own. But meanwhile, you have to go through that uncomfortable feeling that you have and that anxiety, right? So
I think it was Pure O Chrissy that said that wishing is a compulsion. It can be a compulsion
yeah,
because
I can
it's
see
the
that.
opposite of accepting, right? If
Yeah,
you're
yeah,
wishing the anxiety to go away,
yeah,
it's not going to go away.
yeah, exactly, exactly. Yeah.
But I find it so interesting because I find themes fascinating because, like, I've had ROCD,
Hmm.
and since I'm not in a relationship, I just don't have it anymore. I just don't care. And I
Yeah,
was obsessed about it for months.
yeah. So
Um, yeah.
yeah, I guess the key thing then for you will be like when you're in your next relationship is, and if it starts to come back, is okay, what are you going to do? Like, how are you going to approach it? What are you going to do about it? So you've got the tools, you've got the strategies now, and so it's a matter of now trying to implement them. Then when it comes, if I'm not saying it will come back, but like if it does come back, right? So
Yeah, well, I did a lot of inner healing work because I realized that ROCD is deeper than just compulsions. But that kind of goes for every theme, right? There's this core fear at the
yeah,
base of every theme, and they tend to overlap. But we tend to just look at the superficial picture of the theme. But when you get down to it, it's very similar.
I totally agree with that. I'm actually working on that a bit now with my therapist around trying to peel back the layers a bit, because my overall fear is kind of the same, but sometimes it manifests itself differently. And why do I have that fear? Is there a reason I have that fear? Like, I don't know. It could just, I'm not sure whether this is going to solve anything or not. But we're trying to take a slightly different approach in the sense that but I feel that I've been able to get to this point because I've learned so like the strategies for how to deal with like, okay, like this morning, for example, like how to deal with that, like how to deal with these superficial thoughts and things. So now it's like my therapist said, okay, so let's spend a bit of time. Can we maybe go a bit deeper and see what's going on? Why do you have this kind of core fear about harming other people, right? Or especially the people you love? Like where is that coming from? And can we talk about that a bit? Because it's cutting across all the different manifestations of my OCD.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the journey because at the beginning, I thought it was just checking compulsions. I thought, okay, if I can just stop this weirdo checking thing that I do,
Yeah.
where I spend half an hour checking, I'll be fixed. And
Yeah.
so I did
Exactly.
that, and then it changed things.
Yep. Totally.
And then I got health anxiety for like several
Yeah.
months. And it was like, I remember just being so frustrated at my therapist. I was like, my OCD has morphed. What do I do? I hate this.
Yeah.
And she was like, yeah, that's very common for people with OCD that their theme morphs because our brain wants something to focus on to feel safe. It
Mm.
literally doesn't care. It will focus. If everything is totally fine, it'll be like the roof is going to cave in. And then you'll start obsessing about that.
Yeah. That's so true. Yeah, no, exactly. And it's funny that this thing, like I remember, like I was saying last couple of weeks, like in terms of, this theme of my, hand, blood and contamination and stuff like that with the hand cream and everything's kind of becoming more of a focus. I remember thinking like before that, like for 2 or 3 days, like my OCD was pretty good, like almost non-existent. Like I knew I had a couple things I needed to worry about. Like, like it's like sometimes you think, okay, is everything all right? Like that's what my brain does. It scans. And
I love when you say that. It's like it's going like,
yeah, yeah.
what's wrong?
Yeah, it's to say, okay, I'm gonna just make sure, and then I'll think, oh yeah, remember that thing? Oh yeah, oh but hang on, that's okay because this, and then so I remember thinking like, okay, everything's all right. I still have to deal with this thing in the downstairs cupboard, but I can do that later, and that's not a big deal. So, and then so I felt this calmness, like this, it's all right. And then what happens the next day? This thing starts, right? Like with the contamination stuff with the hand cream and the little cuts on my fingers and stuff. And I was like, oh god damn it, like, here we go. But it's classic. It always then will pick on something which you haven't been thinking about for a while when you're feeling like, oh, like all right with like the other ones, you know. So
That's actually so true because I hadn't had this work like, I told you I had trouble with spreadsheets. I think I
yeah,
made a mistake.
yeah,
And I'll go from like a month or two without thinking about it, and I'll be like, "Oh, remember that time?
yeah,
That one spreadsheet? Like you ruined your career."
yeah.
And it's the worst because you actually believe it.
Oh yeah,
And you know that the only procedure is to say, "Yep, I've ruined my career. That's it. You're done." Like maybe.
maybe,
Not like with certainty, but like maybe.
yeah,
And it feels terrible. But yeah,
absolutely,
like let's go back, let's circle back to the relapse part of this.
yeah.
Um,
I'm just gonna just
so
1 second. I'm just gonna see if my headphones are gonna work.
okay. Technical difficulties. Uh, while we're waiting for Matt, maybe I can just go back to what I was about to say. Is that there are 3 steps you can take when you get a relapse. Okay. So the first thing is label it as OCD. So I don't like to, it's not good to use labeling as reassurance, but sometimes you can say, this feels like a thought process that is OCD. So it's always when you're trying to figure out something and it feels really immediate and like you're gonna die, like any of those kinds of anxious feelings, I get like a gut feeling when OCD has like invaded my body. So label that thing as OCD. Let's assume it, even though we don't know for sure. The second thing you have to tell yourself is, I don't know. So whatever question you have, whatever what if that comes into your brain, right away, just say, I don't know. Because what happens when you spiral is when you engage with that what if and you start to think of all the things that could possibly go wrong, um, that is when the spiral really takes place. And then the third thing is to move on. So I'm going to try to let Matt in again.
Yeah, my headphones aren't cooperating today. I apologize.
That's okay. I think there's actually not that big of a echo.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. Oh, you're welcome for the steps. Yeah, so I was just talking about the 3 steps. So label OCD.
Yeah.
I'm trying to figure something out. This feels like OCD. Don't
Yeah.
go any further than that because figuring out if
No.
you have OCD is a compulsion.
Mm-hmm.
2 is I don't know. Whatever, what if your brain comes up with, I don't know.
Yeah.
And then 3, and to me, this is like the gold standard rule. Whatever is happening is move on. And you were talking about that too. What were you doing before the intrusive thought caught your attention? Continue doing that. Or like even something like, I need to take a shower. Like, what is a self-care thing? Really basic. I need to take a walk. Do
Mm-hmm.
that. And then if there's a anxious in the background, well, fine. Just
Yeah.
continue on with your day. And what happens is like an hour or two later, you'll forget what you, well, not always, but you'll sort of, the feeling will have gone down and whatever it was won't feel as immediate and anxious provoking.
Absolutely. Yeah. Totally agree.
And what Reed Wilson says is like it's important to keep these steps really simple because, like I was saying earlier, when you're in the middle of a panic attack or an anxiety attack, you can't remember anything, like maybe not even your own name.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. No, it's that's why I think one of the when I'm in the middle of it too, you kind of try to remind myself if I can't think, no, if I don't know what to do, like just do nothing, like so or go for a walk or something, but don't try and solve like whatever it is you're trying to solve. Just and eventually it'll pass, and you'll be able to think about it from a slightly different point of view, or you'll consider things that you can't when you're in the middle of that attack. So best to just, even if you say, okay, you know what, another one I did is I say, I'm just going to deal with this in 15 minutes. So I'm going to do for 15
I
minutes.
use that every day. I'm like,
Yeah,
okay, 15
yeah,
minutes. Because
yeah.
it's sometimes it's hard to say, I'm not going to do this compulsion ever.
No, so
That can feel really final and also very like black and white thinking, which is a problem with OCD sufferers. So just give
yeah.
it 15 minutes. And even if you do the compulsion after 15 minutes, hey, that was a win because you waited 15 minutes.
Exactly. And then the next time you might be able to wait 17 minutes and then you know what I mean, eventually it turns into a day or something. So yeah, start small, start 5 minutes. If you can't do 15 minutes, even do 5 minutes. So yeah.
Well, that's where the like take the win things comes in. And I used to be really hard on myself when I started treatment because like if I couldn't do the exposure right and I ended up doing a compulsion, I would just like it was almost like self-flagellation. Like I just was so mean to myself.
Mhm.
And then my therapist was like, "Okay, Margot, you've had this for 20 years. You're not gonna stop today.
Yeah.
Like that's just not a reality." And I was like, "But I want to."
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
So
No,
like I sometimes I track my wins and just like take the wins. 5 minutes not doing a compulsion. That's amazing.
yeah.
And that was the other part that I talked about when I was advertising this was
Mhm.
self-compassion. And we
Totally.
talk about this all the time. Like
Yeah.
talking to yourself in a kind way is as important as response prevention. And I think that that's not advertised enough.
hmm Yeah, I totally agree. And I think this is something where you've helped me a lot because you focused on it and it's been huge for me because you're right. Like in the so far, like my treatment and everything didn't really mention that. It just talks about what, you know, the things we've been talking about, like exposure response prevention and, you know, doing nothing and all these things and letting the anxiety sit there and all that. And I mean, and that's important and that obviously helps a lot. But part of, I think a lot of people's OCD is they feel either shame or they feel anger or like at the OCD, they feel frustration. They don't like themselves.
Which are
You know,
all valid emotions. Let's be clear.
exactly. Like they think they're a bad person. All these things, um, and so to treat yourself kindly. And most people with OCD, like I mean, I don't know, most I've kind of read this is that there seems to be a correlation between people who have OCD and um, they're usually quite empathetic people. Um, who care about others and who want to do the right thing and all these kind of stuff.
Yeah, well, you know, I have another account called
Yes,
Weaponized Empath, right?
I
For
know
a
this one.
reason.
Yeah, exactly. Guilt. Someone put guilt. Yeah, guilt is classic with OCD, and
It's
all these
just
things add up.
as invasive as anxiety, I think.
Yeah, and all these things add up to feeling crappy about yourself. Like you know, so but how if someone else came to you with you know these kinds of feelings, like you would probably be very kind to them and try to make them feel better about themselves. And so if you apply that kind of thinking to yourself, it can be transformational. And
My
it really,
therapist said that like word for word. She said, speak to yourself like you would a cherished loved one.
exactly, like, and, I find for myself when I'm really in a bit of a spiral and I kind of just, it feels off. And then I say, you know what, like, you've got to, you have this and it's okay. Like, be kind to yourself. Like, it's okay for you to have this, disorder. It's okay for you to, whatever you're worried about, it's okay. You're doing the best you can. You are a good person. All these positive things. And, and that
Or it's
reminding
not even
yourself,
you're a good person, it's that you're trying your best.
yeah, you're trying
You
your
know?
best and that self-compassion. I repeat that word, or that, those two words, self-compassion. I just say that and it helps me. It gives me a little boost. It gives me a little lift. And it's just something extra that helps in addition to in terms of dealing with the exposures. Yeah, it's huge. I think it's really huge.
Yeah, I think you are doing the best you can, and you are doing, it's good enough is what we were talking about yesterday.
Yeah,
Good enough because we don't know where to draw the line. We could go forever. I mean, that's why we do compulsions, is
yeah,
we don't know where the line is. But sometimes I think like, okay, well, what would I find acceptable for my mom to do? And sometimes I
yeah,
just do that. And
yeah,
it doesn't feel like enough for me because my bar for myself is like up here
yeah.
and I need to like, bring it down to here,
Bring it down there.
where I can see it.
Yeah. I really like the line. that I think you used in a post. I was talking about you yesterday, but you said something, do the best, it's good enough. We're human beings, not human doings. And oh my God, that was so good. Like, because
I
yeah,
took that from another Instagram post, not
oh
gonna
well,
lie.
that's all right. That's okay. It's a great line
I
wherever you
thought it
got
was
it.
amazing.
It is amazing because I think with OCD, a lot of the time we're trying to do something, right, to fix it and to feel better. And you have to do this to make sure this doesn't happen and all these things. Whereas sometimes it's better just to be, right? Just be in the present, be kind to yourself. And you really can't control what's going to happen in the future. You think you can, but you can't. And there are so many other variables that you are not thinking about because you're so fixated on one particular one. So yeah.
Well, yeah, that we never see the bigger picture, right? We only
No.
focus in on that one risk.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
that's how
for
we get in
sure.
trouble.
Yeah.
And one thing that I wrote, so I've been following Dr. Tersh and
Yes.
sharing a lot of his
Yeah.
stuff because
Yeah.
I
He's
think
great.
he's amazing. And
Yeah.
what he said was sometimes beating ourselves up is a way for us to get control in a situation where we feel like we have completely lost control.
Hmm.
And I was like, oh, this is why I'm like this. This
Yeah.
is,
Yeah.
like my whole life, I have just been an enemy to myself.
Yeah.
And do you ever notice there's not one time when I'm obsessing that I'm being nice to myself? Like,
No.
not once.
No.
Like,
Never.
why did you do that? How could you
Oh
do
yeah.
that better? Look, you hurt that person.
Oh yeah.
Look, you're
No.
hurting yourself. It's never like, oh, like, you go, girl, it's fine.
No, exactly. Yeah. No, it's always, I'm always just saying, oh, you're idiot. You're an idiot. You idiot. What'd you do that for? Like,
Yeah.
that. Exactly. Um, sorry, just before I went for the headphones, I know you had said like, okay, you're talking about relapses. Do you want to talk about kind of what they mean maybe and how to manage them?
Yeah, so I talked about my 3 steps while you were
Yeah.
getting your headphones.
Okay.
And then there were 2 other things. So I want to talk about beliefs about relapses.
Mm-hmm.
And this was huge for me because Anxiety Josh has this cool little graph where he says,
Yeah.
like we have this really black and white view of success and like we view relapse as a failure. And everybody in support group, like who hasn't done as much inner work, thinks that it's a failure. And it's you can see the people who are later on the journey that they're like, no, this
Mm-hmm.
is not a failure because we've thought a lot about it.
Yeah.
Because there's like this graph where, at the top, you're
Yeah.
doing well, and then at the top you go down,
Yeah.
and then we zone in on the going
Yeah.
down part of the graph.
Yeah.
And we say, look, you're a failure because like you're feeling anxious and you just did a bunch of compulsions and you've just erased all of this hard work that you've done.
Yeah.
And like all of these are irrational beliefs that we need
Mm-hmm.
to destroy.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, and um, yeah, we think like with that graph, like I know the one you're talking about, like and you're going up and in that little, but instead of that, you
Mhm.
come like you have that little relapse, but it feels like, and we tell ourselves, or people who struggle a lot with relapse tell us, oh, I'm right back down at the bottom. I'm right back at the beginning of the graph. Like, what was all that for? All that work I did, here I am again. I'm a failure. Blah blah blah, like you just said, and what helps me a lot is to tell myself and we tend to think a lot like just, okay, very short term, but you fail to see that if you've been managing or struggling or, with OCD for a long time, is that you have made probably like so much progress. And it's because the way the brain works with OCD is like if you just keep doing the compulsions all the time, all the time, all the time, you're just making like a well-beaten path in a forest. Like that's the path you're on. Your brain has got those connections. So
And it's
whenever
there's a reason we do them is because it's the easier path because it's
exactly,
already been laid out for us.
yeah. So you just keep walking that path. So when you start doing treatment, right, you're starting to walk off that path, right, and to like try a different way. And so if you do that for a few months, and like even when you have a relapse, it doesn't mean that you've gone back to the beginning of the path. You've made those little excursions off the path, right? And created some new ones that exist in your brain. And when you have a relapse, you don't erase those. So you're not going back to the beginning. You've kind of put one foot back on that main path that you don't want to be on, but you've still got like quite a few other paths that you can go down. And sure, like it might not feel that great that you're back on that main one that you don't like, but your brain is not right back at the beginning. And it's just, unfortunately, like recovery doesn't just go in a straight line. It
No, we
involves,
often talk about the roller coaster of recovery.
yeah. So that's what it is. Like, it's okay. It's okay to have a relapse. I mean, whenever someone's trying to deal with whatever, like, do they usually solve it perfectly first time? No. Like, so it's,
But once one of the volunteers, she made a funny comment because we were saying, oh, like we wish that, we could just feel better right away. We could just like everybody in the
yeah,
group and the new people are like, how long did it take for you to recover?
yeah.
And they want like a timeline for when they'll feel better.
Hmm.
And often that's how our brains work because we're so caught up in the immediate
Yes,
relief. It's like
exactly.
a drug. Essentially,
Yeah,
I see it as like every time you do a compulsion, it's like taking a drug.
yeah. No,
And we
that's
want
totally,
that without all of the pain that goes along with exposure response prevention, which is impossible.
totally impossible. I mean, I do compulsions every day. Like, I mean, well, not every day, but well, maybe I'll probably do little ones every day. And it's just because, sometimes, yeah, it is just a bit, it's the easy route, and I don't have time to do the exposure and deal. I've got stuff to do, whatever, like, and other times I'm better at, no, I'm not going to. But I know longer, if I always try though to take a step back and look at the bigger picture and the longer term and where I've come from and what my OCD was like 3-4 years ago, and where I am now. And do I still want to be better? Absolutely. But I'm in such a better place from that overall perspective, rather than seeing on it like sometimes, yeah, okay, how was I today versus yesterday versus tomorrow? Like it's too, like it's noise. Like, you're looking at the noise.
That's
It's like,
all. Yeah, what was Dr. Tersh saying? He was saying that like as a therapist, you really have to say like your client, wherever you are today is where you're meant to be.
mm,
And we forget that. And we always like, there's a combo, right? We need to have the bigger picture. It's like if you're getting a degree, you can't be like looking at this next test and saying like, oh, this is hard. Like,
yeah, exactly.
today sucks.
Yeah,
And so I don't want to get this degree because I hate studying.
yeah,
But then there's another point where like you're beating yourself up and you have to say no, like where I am today is where I'm supposed to be on the recovery journey because it's acceptance. This is where I am. And so
yeah.
tough. I'm still gonna suffer for a bit.
Absolutely. And you touched on acceptance, which is another huge part of recovery. And there's another OCD account. I think it might be it's the British guy, but he talks about unconditional self-acceptance.
Oh,
And
Robert Bray, yeah.
yeah, yeah. And like, wow, like that. I'm still trying to figure out, maybe I shouldn't be trying to figure it out too much, but what exactly that means. But it's a pretty powerful statement when you really think about it, and accepting, as you said, that wherever you are, like that just is, like you can't fight that, right? So, and as soon as you start accepting all these kinds of thoughts and obsessions and things, rather than resisting them, fighting them, figuring them out, even thinking about like in any way, shape or form engaging with them, and just accepting, it is such a powerful way of taking away OCD's power. It's not easy, it takes practice, because often I think people with OCD, or the people I've run into with OCD, tend to be kind of thinkers, and they think a lot in
We
the,
are all overthinkers. I don't think there's one of
but
us that isn't one.
no, exactly. But that also can be quite, beneficial in other aspects of our life. And it probably, like for me, I know in certain aspects of my life, I like the way that I think about certain things, and apply thinking to either my work or some of my hobbies, etc. And so, it's hard. Our brains are constantly doing that. So sometimes when we tell ourselves, no, I just have to accept this thought and not overthink it, it's hard because our brain naturally wants to think about it, right? Because it's doing that all the time with all these other things too. Like it's just the way
Well,
we are. So, yeah.
I sometimes view recovery, I always view recovery as like changing and unlearning habits. And
Yeah.
so like this overthinking is just like any other habit that we have. You know, like some people, we have like, I mean, this is a bad example, but like some people chew their nails, or you know, like some people drink a bit too much, and like that's a bad habit. And changing habits that have been ingrained for years, it's
Mm.
not going to happen overnight. That's just
Yeah.
not a reality.
Yeah.
It takes, but what's good is that after you've been doing recovery techniques for months and
Hmm.
then for years, like that becomes a habit and your brain starts to automatically go to that like healthy way of thinking.
Yeah, for sure. It's just like practicing that, like anything else, like, it changes the way in terms of it's like almost like a motor pattern too. Like you have to relearn and you have to learn a new one. Like if you're learning to play a sport or a piano or whatever, right? Or trying your brain needs time to learn that new way of moving its fingers or new way of swinging a racket or whatever it is. And it's the same I find with OCD. I notice my brain sometimes it's like, I know this is overthinking, but I think about the way that my brain thinks, like, and
Thinking about thinking, yeah.
thinking about thinking. But
I do that too. Sometimes I watch my brain and I'm like, what are you doing
yeah,
though?
I know.
Like, because
And
I know I'm so far removed from OCD these days that I'm like, no, like, shut up. Like, I know
yeah,
that's not acceptance, but I'm like, I know what you're trying to do. I can see you trying to prove I'm a good person, but like, let's just drop it because
yeah,
we know where this path leads. It's
yeah.
nowhere good.
No, exactly. But like it's interesting because like probably several months ago, my brain would have wanted to have thought about something, or like a lot more. And now it'll only do it sometimes for, when I catch myself for like a minute or two and then it stops. And it's like, oh, I noticed that is my new pathway that's stepping off the main path. Like, and my brain is getting more and more comfortable with letting that thing go, whatever it was. And that's because of all the practice that I've done,
Yeah, so
and
somebody
doing that.
actually is asking this, like, can you give me tips on how to stop ruminating?
Mm.
We love talking about ruminating. We ruminate about ruminating.
Yeah. Um,
I think, okay, so for the person who asked this question, you need to listen to the OCD Stories podcast called
mm,
Rumination is a Compulsion.
hmm.
He's like given me some of the best advice on how to stop.
Yeah.
Um, but the idea is like we think that stopping ruminating is like some active thing, but you actually like have to let it go. So it's like it's this practice of noticing when you're ruminating, which takes a while, as we said, because it's so automatic.
Hmm.
So notice when you're doing it, and then like don't even finish that thought. And it's really hard. I'm not saying this is easy, but he talks
Hmm.
about it in the stories like
Hmm.
drop it because, and then remind yourself, when has ruminating ever given me anything useful?
Yeah, that's a good one around. I would challenge anybody who ruminates that has it actually solved the thing that you were worrying about? And I would argue that it never does because there's always an extra what if,
So
you
this
know.
person says they spend hours in the mornings, and actually OCD Ottawa shared a great post about mornings,
Hmm.
which I love, is that you have to get out of bed. So
Yeah.
yeah, like you can't just drop it in. It's frustrating. And I trust me, like me and Matt, we
Hmm.
ruminate a lot. Like I
Yeah.
still do.
Oh, yeah.
And so what like this is what I talk about moving on, and in Brain Lock they talk about this refocus your attention.
Hmm.
So get out of bed. So keep your phone in another room.
Yep.
Set an alarm across the room that you can't snooze without getting up.
Yep.
Get up. The
Yep.
longer you stay in bed, the worse you're gonna be.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel for this person that they're stuck. Yeah, like and it kills me. I get it. Like I've been there before. Like, and I was, I've said this before. I spent like 2 weeks in a mental health facility, like as an inpatient, because my rumination, my OCD was so bad I couldn't function, and it was just I was on constant loop. So, for people out there who are struggling that bad, you can get better. I'm an example of it. I have it. I'm back at home. I'm functioning. I take care of 3 kids. I've got a job. All that kind of stuff. So. But yeah, these little things like the best way, like is unfortunately you can't stop the rumination. Like you can't. I mean, you can, like you said, you can try and let it go, like which you can get better at with practice, and I agree. Like, um, but you need to, and as Margot was saying, refocus your brain, refocus whatever you're doing, even though you're ruminating. So get out of bed, go for a walk instead of having breakfast, do something different, even do 50 jumping jacks, like something, like just, you know, and even though the rumination is there, you still just have to force yourself to do these other things to refocus your brain.
It's actually like there's us. I mean, I don't like to separate us because we're all one human, but like there's us, and then we are showing our brain with behaviors that the ruminating is pointless. Because we
Yeah,
know, like intellectually, I know OCD is whack. Like I think everybody with OCD knows that that's what's so frustrating.
yeah,
But until you do behaviors that show your brain that ruminating is pointless, it's going to continue thinking that it's serving a purpose.
yeah,
And
yeah,
so by doing things, I'm like moving on, like you said, showing your brain that it can get on with its day even if it
yeah,
feels like ruminating. It'll the next time it tries to ruminate, it'll be like, oh, well, like last time we did jumping jacks and the
yeah,
ruminating didn't really serve any purpose.
yeah,
And I was still able to get that exercise in.
yeah,
And it's slowly over time it
yeah,
will learn this, but
yeah.
it's
And
not easy.
it's not easy, but you're so right. I was able to do the jumping jacks, like, and I think this person that said, like, the rumination is always on in the background. You go, yeah, you have to take instead of complaining about that, right? I know this is hard and I'm not being, um, saying that it's easy, but you have to almost say, like, yeah, hello, like, okay, I'm going to accept that it's on in the background and go on with my day. And trust me, it might be hard at first, but over time, if you do that, the rumination will it may not dissipate completely, but it will lessen, because the brain just naturally cannot focus on one thing like all the time. You can't feel like happy all the time. You can't feel anxious all the time. So whatever it is that you're worried about and thinking that it's going to be there forever, humans just don't work. The brain just doesn't work that way. We go up and down with our emotions. Sometimes we're happy, we're sad, we're angry, we're frustrated, we're joyful, we're whatever. And same thing, we're going to think about work and then we'll think about something else. And so the more that you try to control, like whether that rumination is there in the background or not, the less success you'll have. So that's why you got to just go and do whatever you got to do that day with the rumination and not engage with it, and just accept that it's there. And I know that and it sucks because you'll feel that you'll want it to go away. But the more that you do that, the more
I
you
find we
realize it will
feel
pass. It will
like we
pass.
feel like we're admitting something about ourselves by not ruminating.
Yeah.
Like for example, a lot like people with POCD will say, okay, what if I'm a pedophile? So then they will like retrace like what did I do that day and like was
Mm-hmm.
that a bad
Mm-hmm.
thing? And they feel like by letting go of the rumination, they're admitting that they're a
Mm-hmm.
pedophile. But actually,
Yes.
by letting go, you're just admitting that there's an uncertainty there that everybody has, not just you. It's just that you've decided to focus on it.
Yep. That's
And it's
totally it.
in the end of the day, it's accepting uncertainty is the recovery. That is the finally recovery tool.
Yeah. And just
Your
the other
OCD.
thing, like that, the OCD Stories podcast, the one about rumination is a compulsion, which was so good. And I liked, slightly different approach, is to say that you can you're choosing to ruminate, right? Even though you think that you aren't. But in a way, like we've been talking about, all this rumination isn't
Yes.
really serving any purpose, right? So,
It is a choice. We think that there's some OCD like monster in our
yeah,
head that's making us ruminate, but it's us. And it
it
is a
is.
behavior. Even though it's in our head, it's a behavior, which
It,
means we can stop it.
exactly. And I like the way that he referred to, he said, like, okay, if I give you, like, right now, like a math problem to solve, you could choose to say to me, I'm not going to solve that problem right now. Maybe I'll do it tomorrow. I don't know. Or maybe whatever, right? And it's like whatever this thing you're ruminating about, you can take the same approach. You can say, this is like a math problem, and I'm going to choose not to solve this right now, right? And that's it. I'm done. So
And
sometimes
I
like what
used to think that was thought suppression, but it's
no, it
not.
isn't. It's not
That
thought suppression. You have to still leave, the thought will still be there, but you'll just say, like, yeah, okay, you can stay there, whatever issue I'm worried about. You're like a math problem. I'm just choosing not to solve you right now. Maybe I'll
you said
solve you
this thing
later.
that I love is it's like having a question. that you decide not to answer.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
OCD will pose you, like your brain will come up with all these questions for you, but it doesn't mean you have to answer every one. And most of the time, your brain is shooting you random crap
Yeah. And I
that's
would,
not useful.
it's most likely to whatever question you were trying to solve a month ago, you've probably forgotten it by now, right? Maybe you have, maybe you haven't. But a lot of these, some of them may linger and they're still there, but usually they lose their power, or even if they're still there, they don't impact you the same way, or you've forgotten them, you know?
That is the most amazing thing when I forget about an obsession. I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
geez.
Oh, I've forgotten of so many, like, you know.
Uh, it's a little, I know we're not supposed to be reassuring ourselves, but whenever I get an obsession, I just say, you know what, though? Like, this is gonna go away. And
Yeah.
it's teaching our brains that, like, the thought will go away. This is the key. The thought will go away if you don't do a compulsion, or it just will stop mattering. So it'll be there, but like it won't matter.
Yeah.
And that is
Exactly.
one of the most freeing things when I think about a past obsession and I'm like, cool, what's up? And
Yeah.
that's what recovery is. People think recovery is getting rid of all those like negative thoughts. No, they're still going to show up. It's just, it's not going to be part of your identity anymore. You're not going to
Yeah.
feel like a freak because you had the thought, and you're not going to think you're automatically a bad person because you had this thought.
Hmm. The other thing with relapse, like that, I think that podcast, that particular episode can help with is because again, with the relapse, we focus on like, oh, this short-term thing that I'm now having to deal with, and so and you get wrapped up in you know, whatever triggered you. And I like to also think about, I like the way that this, I think his name was Michael Greenberg, talked about saying most people with OCD have like a core fear. Um, and it's different for everyone, but there's maybe three or four kind of
There's
similar.
only a few. It's wild,
Yeah,
eh?
it's only a few. Like, you know, one of them can be like death or fear of harm to others, or, you know, there's a couple others like not coming to mind right now. But whatever that core fear is, like it will then manifest itself in, you know, whatever, you know, that particular trigger was. And instead of thinking about the trigger, like he says, okay, instead of thinking about, or will this happen, you know, because of this thing on my finger, or will this happen because I had this thought that I was going to attack someone with a knife, or, you know, what, or will I, you know, with relationship OCD, you know, do I really not love my partner? Whatever that thing is, like, take a step back and go, what is the core fear here? The fear is that, you know, I'm a bad person, or the fear is that I will be, you know, a bad partner, or I will cause harm to happen, or whatever. And then he says that core question, the answer to that question of what you should do about it is nothing. Like, and it was, when he said that, it was like so powerful, because he's like, and then you say, so because you don't have to do anything about that question because it's just garbage, right? Then whatever the trigger is, you don't need to do anything about that either, right? So, and I was like, oh, wow. Like, so sometimes when I'm really stuck, I just say, you know what, your core fear is that you're a bad person because you're going to harm your kids. But, you know, I don't need to do anything about that question. So, because that's a
Because
nonsense question.
because also
It's a
something that we forget is that your kids being harmed is largely and almost entirely outside of your control.
exactly. Anything. I mean, tomorrow she get well, probably not in the pandemic, get hit by a bus, but, you know, because,
Yeah.
but you know what I mean? Like, so,
Yeah, exactly. The
so,
outcome, this was
yeah,
life changing for me too. The outcome is 100% outside of your control.
yeah, absolutely.
We
So,
think we're like these magicians that can stop like the bad
yeah,
thing from happening, but
yeah,
it's very humbling when you realize like, you
yeah,
know,
that you're not the master of the universe. So, yeah, so,
and it's hard because this is a belief held by society. Like we think, okay, if I do this, if I work hard and I do this, then I'll get that. And it's like, no, you have to enjoy the process of life because
because 99 other things, million things could happen too, you know.
that, and then if you want to get really deep, we're all dead in the end anyway.
Well, okay, let's try and keep this uplifting. But anyway,
No, but it's like it's kind of like the YOLO mentality. It's not
yeah,
trying to
yeah,
be dark. It's just like YOLO.
yeah,
Like
yeah, yeah.
live
No,
your
no,
life.
yeah, yeah. No, I know.
Not in a bad way.
Yeah, yeah. No, no. I was just kidding. But
Yeah,
yeah,
and then the last thing that I wanted to touch on to make sure because it's almost hit an hour is
yes,
relapses. are a good thing. They
Yeah,
can be a
yeah,
great thing.
yeah.
Like
So
some
yeah.
of the most, like I'll get these little epiphanies, and they almost only happen when I've had a relapse. Like I remember, I'll never forget, like it was like a month or two into treatment. My mom was in Italy and I call her and I'm like, I'm freaking out. Like it was like an ROCD thing. I was like,
Mm,
I know this person just dumped me. And then I think that like, and my intrusive thoughts were just like
yeah, yeah,
insane. Cause like that was at the time I didn't even know what ROCD was, but I was like
yeah.
hugely triggered and like I didn't know why. And then I went to my therapist the next day and I was still like coming down from it. And I was like, I think I asked for too much reassurance from my mom. And my therapist looked at me like, how did you figure that out on your own? I remember she just looked at me like, you figured that out without me like having to tell you. Because
Yeah,
when you've been seeking reassurance from this person for like years, it feels so natural. But
yeah.
like in that moment, I was like, this does not feel like something about the reassurance feels like a compulsion to me.
Hmm.
Because I was starting to realize like what compulsions, like I knew I was doing compulsions, but I didn't realize like what they meant,
Hmm.
or that they provided instant relief. And then I realized, like, of course, like a couple of months later, like, oh, reassurance is a very big compulsion of every OCD sufferer.
Absolutely, absolutely. I want to touch on because I had a similar experience. Someone just put a comment. They recently weaned off Zoloft and relapsed after several years of doing well. It's so hard to be back in such a bad place. Um, and they thought they were past this. I want to talk about medication a little bit because of that, because I had a similar experience a couple of years ago. I went off my medication, had a massive relapse, felt horrible. I've had to kind of claw my way back. I'm back on medication now. Um, I didn't want to be on medication, got really frustrated at first that I had to be on it. And, my psychiatrist was talking to me, the psychiatrist I was seeing with when I went back on the medication, and he said, you know what? He said, there's this stigma around medication um, for mental illnesses, right? Because I mean, I know some people don't like to take medication, fine. But typically, like if we have some other kind of physical issue, like that we're given medicine for, or we have to have an operation for, or whatever, we say, oh, okay, like, well, I guess I need that to, get myself healthy again. And he said, like, so it's the same thing, like the brain is just another part of the body. So if you need medication to help in terms of it functioning better, well, there's nothing wrong with that. And some people take blood thinners or whatever, or, for 20 years when they're older. Some people take whatever, I mean, I'm not a medical doctor, pills for certain things, like to help their kidney function or whatever, especially as we get older. And we accept that. And so he said to me, if you need to be on this medication for the next 20 years, so far all the evidence, has showed that it's not going to cause a problem. Like, so if that's going to help you live a better quality of life, well, what's wrong with that? You know what I mean? So I was like, oh, okay. Like, I don't really need to worry about the medication anymore. So now I just take it. I do think about going off it and trying again at some point, but it's okay. It's part of my life. And again, it's acceptance. It's accepting that that's just part of the deal, right? So um, in terms of medication, like, and relapses for sure, I've, managed that with your psychiatrist. And, there are ways to obviously to recover and get better.
And one thing I want to mention, because it came up, is I think going cold turkey off your medication
Yeah,
can easily cause a relapse. So it's important
absolutely.
to wean yourself off.
Yeah, yeah, no, for sure. But if you do need to be on medication, it's okay. Lots of people are on medication for all sorts of
Yeah.
things that are not related to mental
And
illness.
I want to highlight too that you can recover without medication. Like
Yeah,
I don't take medication and
yeah,
Charlie
that's
doesn't
right.
either.
Yeah,
Personally, it's just because I'm afraid of the side effects.
yeah,
Which like I thought about it and I thought like, okay, if I get to a really, really bad place, I would consider it, but because I've been doing so well,
hmm,
I just don't feel like I need it. But it's perfectly acceptable to do both. The thing with
yeah,
medication is that if you're in a really bad place and then you start doing response prevention, you might be having panic attacks like every day because response prevention is really anxiety provoking. And so it's like having like floaties, like when you're learning
yeah,
to swim.
yeah.
And so medication won't get you recovered, but it'll
No,
help you get to a point where you can do the work. So like you need a psychiatrist and a therapist.
yeah. That's what it does for me. Like for me, and I'm going to see, like, because I had this big relapse 2 years ago, and now I'm going to give it another few months, and then I might talk to my doctor about maybe going off the medication, trying again, and we'll see. But for me right now, like, if I don't take it for 2 or 3 days, it's I can forget to take it, and I'm all right, you know. But I do notice if I forget the third day, maybe, like, then I'm a bit more vulnerable, like, to the OCD. So it is like the floaties with the swimming for me. Like, it allows me to be able to do the exposure work. So because when I do then take it on the third day or whatever, and I don't miss a day for the next week, my brain, I can tell it's kind of weird. It feels like stronger. Like, it feels being able to withstand, like, you know, the exposures, like the anxiety a bit more. But yeah, it's not the be all end all. It's not, the work is more important. The ERP is definitely what's more important for sure.
Yeah, and to highlight, I always like to highlight this when I can, find a therapist who specializes in exposure and response prevention and
Mm-hmm.
who knows what OCD is and is like well aware of the treatment, because otherwise therapists don't understand like how our brain works and they can actually make us worse.
Totally agree. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
It's not easy because like in Ottawa we have a great clinic that almost all the
Mm-hmm.
therapists know exactly what OCD is, but that's not the case
Mm-hmm.
everywhere.
I find, yeah, I hear about people going to therapists who think they can help OCD by, like, what they call talk therapy. And like you said, I think there's a big risk and it can just make it worse.
Yeah,
Um,
because it's a compulsion for us to like go over and
yeah,
fix,
exactly. To
fix.
discuss these things, you know, ad infinitum, you know, well, why that really is an issue or not an
And it
issue.
feels great in the moment, and then after
Yeah.
you're like, ah,
Yeah,
crap.
because then you leave and then you're like, oh, but we didn't consider it from this angle, you know, and then so you're right back in it again.
Exactly. There will always be another what if to be had.
Oh
I
yeah.
will, I will end my days with like what ifs. It's just that the
Yeah.
what if won't be important anymore.
Yeah, no, that's true. That's true.
Okay, do you have
Um,
any like closing remarks?
well, I mean, I guess just to some of the things like we touched on today with it, um, you know, it's don't be surprised that OCD can morph from one theme to the next, but really it's just all the same. It's just a manifestation of that OCD thought process.
And when you're starting treatment, I would say it's almost certainly going to morph because you're going to
Yeah,
start doing exposures on one theme and you're going to get comfortable with it, and then something else is going to come up.
exactly. And so that's why, like, you know, the less you can focus on the trigger and the content of that theme, and the more on just, okay, how do I deal with this in terms of from a thought process point of view, and accepting it and letting it go, etc. The better. And that relapses are just part of the recovery process. There's nothing wrong with having a bad day or a bad week or even a bad month. It's
Half of
okay.
the suffering from a relapse is our reaction to the relapse, I think. Like if we
Absolutely.
were just to relapse and be like chill with it and move on, we would get over it so much faster.
Yeah, no, that's true. And like you said earlier, they can help you. They can be a good thing. It's like, you know, with anxiety being a good thing because it means that you haven't done a compulsion if you're feeling anxious, right? So it's in the short term that sucks, but in the longer term, as you look at this for after month after month after month, it's going to make you stronger. So for sure, you just
It's
have to.
almost like when you're lifting weights and then you lift like a really heavy weight. It really
Yeah,
hurts in the moment, but then
yeah,
after, like that's where you see the rewards.
totally. Yeah, that's a
So,
really good analogy. Yeah. So
so it's a
yeah,
really good,
so
it's a good thing. Even though it doesn't feel like it right now, it's always with like the big picture.
yeah. And yeah, it's a roller coaster, right? And that's what life is too. A lot of this we can apply to life in general, not just OCD. Like, we don't go through life just, you know, on one plane, like, you know, feeling the same every day, every week, every month, right? Which it's just not part of what it means to be human. So our emotions are always changing. So if you're in the middle of a bad patch right now, you know, that will change, and, you know, you will feel better again. So hang in there.
We forget because like in our minds we think I'll obsess about this forever, but I think we have to remember that
That's
that's literally impossible.
exactly. It's impossible. You're not human if you can do that. So
Yeah, like we can't stay on this one wavelength, like you'll
yeah,
notice it's gonna fluctuate. Even if you're not in therapy, your anxiety is gonna
yeah,
fluctuate, your feelings are gonna
exactly.
fluctuate. It's just therapy shows us when we step back and look at it and we
Yeah,
challenge that irrational belief. that's when magic happens.
Yeah, totally agree.
Well, thanks for joining, guys, and I'm
Yeah,
happy this was helpful.
yeah, absolutely. Thanks everybody for listening today, and thank you so much, Margot, for this conversation. It's been great.
Yeah, and next week I'm going to talk to OCD excellence in the UK, and we're going
Oh,
to talk
cool.
about how treatment varies, like Canada versus the UK. So I'm pretty excited about that.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'll listen for sure.
All right, bye.
All right, bye. Have a good day. See ya.
You too.
Bye, everyone.